which makes it harder to track the actual voucher use. Department officials said that they rely on parents to self-report the voucher use, which resulted in multiple spellings of the same school. The new voucher law also doesn't require private schools to report standardized test scores like public schools are required to do. Even supportive Republicans are chiding the lack of knowledge where the vouchers are going. Republican Representative Regina Cobb, who voted for the voucher expansion, asked, "How do we make decisions as lawmakers when we don't even know if it is working?" Dan Barr, a media lawyer, said that it shows the state doesn't care very much. He worries as the voucher program expands. That is even more difficult to track its effectiveness. Ironically, Ducey signed a bill last year that would impose harsh penalties on food stamp use and increase the state's ability to investigate the food stamp abuse. If only the vouchers could be used for food, we might actually have some decent data.
In Arizona, an Arizona company that makes body cameras are offering their product free for police departments. Scottsdale-based Exxon, which is the leading body camera company in the nation, offered their body cameras to departments that are skeptical of the technology. The offer includes a year for free use for the cameras and access to associated software and data storage. The body cameras normally cost $400 and the data storage costs $15 to $90 per month. While Exxon is using the drug dealer approach of getting the first batch free, the departments will need to purchase the equipment after the first year. But the company says that they're more concerned with spreading the use of body cameras, which they say will keep police departments more accountable. Police departments are increasingly embracing the technology because it provides an easy way to prove innocence if an officer is accused of wrongdoing. At the same time, body cameras can be used to accurately show what happened during a confusing event, such as a riot, that provides a more objective point of view as opposed to witness testimony. Exxon, who recently changed their name from Taser, says that their body cameras are now used by 36 of the 68 major law enforcement agencies across the USA. The LAPD alone bought 7,500 of the devices.
A Swedish mining company is moving its North American headquarters to Tucson, according to a press release. Hexagon Mining will move to 40 East Congress Street at the City Park building. The company employs about 580 people worldwide, and 260 will be headquartered at the Tucson office. Hexagon President Helio Zamora said that the new location is highly attractive for millennial talent from universities and abroad. He also said that the company will benefit Tucson by hosting clients for training, sales presentations, and events. The company is now hiring for positions in executive management, sales, HR, legal, marketing, and administrative support. If you're interested, check out hexagonmining.com for job openings or visit their current headquarters at 3544 East Fort Lowell Road. Or you can dig a hole in the parking lot and yell about how you discovered gold in order to impress the company into offering you a job. Gold!
Arizona Senator John McCain once again threw out his Trump troll credibility by supporting last week's airstrikes in Syria. McCain, who never met a bomb he didn't like, praised the strikes and said that Trump, quote, deserves the support of the American people because he confronted a pivotal moment in Syria. Senator Jeff Flake also supported the strikes, calling them an appropriate and timely response to the Syrian attacks. No explanation was given as to why the thousands of Syrian civilian deaths in the past 5 years didn't warrant a similar timely response. While McCain and Flake are all in it when it comes to bombings, other Arizona Republicans, such as Republican Andy Biggs, question why Congress wasn't consulted beforehand. Biggs said that he was, quote, thankful for the president's leadership, but is interested in learning the president's strategy going forward. Going out on a limb here, but it's reasonable to assume the president doesn't have a strategy considering he was against the regime change in Syria just days before the airstrike. Representative Raul Grijalva has similar concerns to Biggs, saying that these actions need to go through a full vote by the Congress because that's what the Constitution asks for. Not that the Constitution has ever stopped Trump before. Grijalva also worries that the airstrike could lead to other military actions by the administration. And judging by the fawning praise that Trump received, this is very likely because, as we know, praise is like heroin to our president. Democrat Tom O'Halloran said that the U.S. must work to stop, quote, barbaric attacks like last week's chemical weapons attack by Assad, which is just stipulation. He said that Congress should not wait for Trump to come up with a plan. Yes, because why should Trump get the credit for killing civilians and further destabilizing Syria? Unsurprisingly, Martha McSally called the strike, quote, measured yet decisive military action in response to the chemical weapons attack. It's been revealed that measured was Congress's word of the week and that every use of the word was rewarded with a free voucher to a sandals resort for the 3-week congressional recess. One of the only Arizona representatives to condemn the attack was Ruben Gallego of Phoenix, who said that while Assad's atrocities are worthy of every bit of condemnation, he does not think the president has put much thought into a long-term strategy. It's likely that the president hasn't put much long-term thought into anything besides his self-image. As for Democrats, over the weekend, they lined up outside the White House, where they had their recently found balls chopped off by a tiny guillotine.
Tiny, tiny balls. Phoenix lawyer and activist Deidre Abboud is seeking a seat on the U.S. Senate in 2018. Abboud announced at a gathering in downtown Phoenix that she is looking to unseat incumbent Jeff Flake. At the gathering, she said that, quote, Arizona, I am ready to deliver for you. Abboud founded the Global Institution of Solutions-Oriented Leadership in Scottsdale in 2015. The group lists its mission to be a rising tide raising all boats. She interned at the ACLU office in Phoenix and practiced as a lawyer focused on estate planning. If she wins, Abboud would be the first practicing Muslim in the Senate. At this moment, we assume Flake's team is trying to figure out how to Photoshop a picture of Abboud holding an ISIS flag. Flake is already facing competition, actually, among Republicans in former state Senate Kelly Ward, who ran against John McCain last year. Ward has been wearing a giant duck costume around town to gain support against Flake.
Officials at the Coronado National Forest are searching for a person of interest in connection to last week's fire on Mount Lemmon. The fire occurred in the Molino area at milepost 4.5 along the Mount Lemmon Highway, according to witnesses. Officials have determined that the fire may have been started because of recreational shooting. They describe the person of interest as a white male, tall with an average to muscular build, which really narrows it down since there's so few white people that visit Mount Lemmon. He was last seen wearing a light-colored hat, a gray shirt, and tennis shoes, and was driving a forest green mid-90s Ford Explorer. Authorities released a composite picture of the suspect this morning, seen here, and said that he often uses the phrase pilgrim. Officials asked that if you have any information about the suspect or witnessed anything in the area, contact the Coronado National Forest Supervisor's Office at 520-388-8300.
And I wanted to take a moment to talk about the program you're watching right here. Here at 5 on 20, we are undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it, and we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, we want hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole gamut. The times require a new way of informing ourselves, so join us, do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think that there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot us an email at info@creativetucson.org. We are here for you, and we want to cover all the stories from all points of views. So don't be strangers. It's about community. Now in national and international news.
This morning, the White House stated that Russia helped Syria try and cover up the chemical attacks last week that killed over 80 people. The White House statement said that the Assad regime and Russia are trying to, quote, confuse the world community about who is responsible for using chemical weapons against the Syrian people, and in this and earlier attacks. While the White House is hinting towards Russian collusion, they haven't yet presented any evidence to support their statements, a typical strategy by the Trump administration. Russia is furious about the missile strikes that hit a Syrian Air Force base on Friday. Russian soldiers were present at the time of the strike but were not hurt in the attack. Russia has called these strikes an act of force and promised that they would deliver proportional attacks for any further aggression. Today was also when Secretary of State Rex Tillerson arrived in Moscow for quite possibly the most awkward dinner with Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. But Russian President Putin refused to meet with Tillerson, despite their past relationship where Tillerson was given an Order of Friendship award in 2013. A spokesman for Putin said that returning to pseudo attempts to resolve the crisis by repeating mantras that Assad must step down cannot help sort things out. Tillerson is reportedly seeking to pull Russia away from backing the Assad regime. Russia claims that Assad is the only hope against containing ISIS and that other militant groups who are running wild in Syria. Before the chemical attacks last Tuesday, the Trump administration felt the same way, but quickly changed course and is now looking to depose Assad. And this is what happens when you give it an ADD-addled toddler deciding foreign policy. You can guarantee that there is an ISIS-inspired attack in the US. Trump will quickly forge a partnership with Assad as if the chemical attack never happened. In the meantime, we'll have to enjoy pictures of Tillerson sadly eating alone in his hotel, missing his ex-friend Putin.
Advocacy groups that have been plastering the nation's newspapers to oppose the law that would lower drug prices has been revealed to be funded by a pharmaceutical industry. The Intercept reported that the groups are calling themselves independent research organizations, but all contain ties to Big Pharma. They have printed advertisements in newspapers such as the Washington Post, the Washington Times, Roll Call, The Hill, and Political. The ads oppose a bill introduced by Senator Al Franken that would allow Medicare to use their bargaining power to lower prescription drug prices. The original ban on negotiating was passed by legislators who took a massive amounts of funding from the pharmaceutical industry. One group that paid for an ad was the American Conservative Union, or ACU, who says that they are devoted to, quote, liberty, personal responsibility, traditional values, and a strong national defense. However, reporter Li Fang found that the group ranked in $100,000. They raked in $100,000 from Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. This is the lobbying group that represents pharma giants such as Merck, Pfizer, Bristol Myers Squibb, Purdue Pharma, and Eli Lilly. Their ad reads, "Will government price setting lower the cost of her prescription drugs?" while featuring a picture of a female senior citizen. Another ad by the Americans for the Tax Reform warns that Medicare Part D could be repealed by government bureaucrats, which would interfere with drug pricing. This is despite the fact that Franken's law would lower the prices of drugs, so it's no surprise that the group took $746,000 from the pharmaceutical lobby since 2014. So far, Franken's Improving Access to Affordable Prescription Drugs Act has 15 co-sponsors, including Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Richard Durbin. Meanwhile, a nonprofit calling itself America's for America released an ad claiming that Elizabeth Warren wants to beat up your grandma, while Bernie Sanders is a Muslim terrorist who wants to get rid of early bird dinner specials.
3 groups are suing the Trump administration to reveal visitor logs to the White House, which they say should be public knowledge. The National Security Archive, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, and Washington for CREW, and the Knight First Amendment Institute launched the suit against the Department of Homeland Security yesterday. The suit claims that the Secret Service has not released the record of visitors despite multiple Freedom of Information requests. The Obama administration began releasing the visitor logs as an attempt to show transparency after CREW filed similar lawsuits. CREW director Noah Bookbinder says that with all the conflict of interest involving Trump, transparency is more important than ever, and that the group had no other choice but to sue. Along with the White House records, the groups are seeking visitor logs for meetings with the president at his home, at Trump Tower, and at the Mar-a-Lago, which Trump calls the Winter White House. Trump has been frequently meeting world leaders at Mar-a-Lago, including Chinese President Xi Jinping last weekend and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Once the logs are released, we'll get to see a guest list that includes Kanye West, Scott Baio, and human doll Wayne Newton. This will cause confusion whether the list is from the White House or from the B-list benefit show for Kanye's new line of $200 fanny packs.
Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren reintroduced legislation that would break up the banks. While this legislation has failed in the past, this time she has support from 3 other senators, including Republican John McCain. Breaking up the bank has also the support coming from members of the Trump administration, making it one of the only issues where Warren and Trump agree. The law would reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act, which separated commercial and investment banking and which was struck down in 1999 under the Clinton administration. The overturning of Glass-Steagall has been partially blamed for the housing crisis and the subsequent economic recession in 2008. Critics say that the Glass-Steagall made it so investment banks couldn't seek profit from risky investments that put taxpayers at risk. Warren seized on comments made this week by Trump's economic advisor and former Goldman Sachs president Gary Kahn, who support bringing back Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall. He told Bloomberg on Friday that reinstating the rule would spur lending and help American businesses. Kahn said that the 21st century version of Glass-Steagall would, quote, tailor regulation for different aspects of the financial markets that would allow banks to get lending more aggressively to small and medium-sized companies. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin has also expressed support that the return of Glass-Steagall, while Trump campaigned on a promise to introduce a new version of the rule. However, the issue hasn't been discussed so far, so they're too busy bombing Syria and investigating voter fraud.
For the second straight year, the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia is experiencing bleaching, according to aerial photographs. Scientists say that this is the first time that while bleaching occurred in 1998, 2002, and 2016, it is the first time that there's been bleaching for 2 consecutive years. They say that this makes it less likely that the coral reef will be able to repair itself. Bleaching is caused by warming waters when colorful tiny algae called zooanthellae die off. When the algae is removed, the coral turns white and weakens due to being bleached. The group that took the photographs, the ARC Center of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies, say that the higher water temperatures are caused by global warming. They say that damage was worse in the middle third of the reef, whereas last year's bleaching occurred in the northern center. But that there was some overlap, meaning that some areas got double dosing of bleaching. The reef can only repair itself if the ocean temperature returns to normal. But if temperatures continue to increase, then the coral will likely die. If even parts of the coral reef disappear, this could have a devastating effect on the fish population, who use the reef as protection against predators and feed off of the algae. The Great Barrier Reef is home to a quarter of all marine life in the world and is recognized by UNESCO as being the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet. In addition to environmental effects, Australia's economy would take a hit if the reef were to disappear. At least 5 billion Australian dollars per year are spent by tourists visiting the reefs. The reefs also employ 70,000 people. They also serve as a buffer to protect the land from intense storms by blunting the impact of hurricanes. The Trump administration set up a group to study the reefs called the Domestic Open Organization for Marine Education Denial, or DOOMED.
Doomed! A UN refugee agency is reporting that West African migrants are being bought and sold openly in slave markets in Libya. The UN's International Organization for Migration interviewed migrants who were trafficked while passing through Libya while headed north to Europe. They described an environment where human trafficking has become so common that people are being traded in public. This is on top of previous UN reports that found a regular pattern of violence and rape aimed at migrants in Libya, a country that has lacked a strong central government since the removal of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Migrants come to Libya both to seek jobs and also to take boats to Europe, where they hope to make their way to Italy. Those with no papers or cash are especially vulnerable to trafficking. Livia Minate, an IOM officer, says that one interviewee from Niger described an open square where the slave trade was happening by people they described as Arab. Other migrants from Niger, Senegal, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo described similar scenes. Another Senegalese migrant said that he had been kidnapped and held ransom for about $600. But before his family could pay, he was transferred to another jail where the ransom was doubled without explanation. He said that the other men who didn't have the ransoms paid were taken away and killed, while others died of hunger and disease while they waited in unsanitary conditions. The IOM also said that they've heard stories of criminals posing as aid groups in order to capture migrants and sell them off. When he was told about the news, Trump asked if he could fix the problem by just bombing Libya because he's, quote, on a roll.
According to a recent report, wealthy Americans live up to 15 years longer than poor Americans. The study was published in the British Medical Journal, The Lancet, with researchers finding that the U.S. healthcare system was mostly to blame for the disparity. Researchers cited that for-profit insurance system and exorbitant costs of quality healthcare to argue for the U.S. to designate healthcare as a human right rather than a commodity as it is now. The study looked at the effects of the healthcare system on social class, along with mass incarceration, has changed public health. They found that the richest 1% of citizens lived 15 years longer than the poorest 1%. According to the study, about 1/3 of Americans avoid medical care because of cost, compared with 7% among citizens of Canada, which has universal health care. They also found that the poorest 1% pay twice as much for health care as a share of income, with health costs being 6% among the poor compared to 3.2% for the rich. Researchers predict that life expectancy would have grown 51% more from 1983 to 2005 if mass incarceration hadn't increased in the mid-80s. Their findings show that the situation among poor Americans have suffered even as medicine and technology have improved. Among the poorest fifth of women living from 1930 to 1960, their life expectancy was only 4 years less than the richest citizens, a much rosier picture than the current generation. To remedy this problem, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan proposed tax cuts for the top 1%, and Jeff Sessions suggested getting tough on serious crimes like marijuana possession.
This is Frank Powers.
And Zaira Livier for 5 on 20 News. Next up, my segment, Adelante Tucson, so stick around for a minute. Good evening and welcome again to Adelante Tucson, Tucson, new platform for political analysis. I am your host, Zaira Livier.
And I'm your co-host, Edward Katz.
Today we are very happy to welcome my friend Antonio Valdovinos. Am I saying that correct?
That's right.
I had it wrong for so long. Antonio is founder of La Machine Field Operations based out of Phoenix. So he's going to be joining us the rest of the show. We wanted to get started today by getting to know you a little bit.
Okay.
I know you're originally from Colima, Mexico. You came here to the United States at the age of 2 with your mom, your dad, and your older brother, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about growing up in Arizona and what that was like as an undocumented youth?
Yeah, it was growing up, as any little kid, you're not thinking about these things, and I think in the Hispanic culture, especially with families that are undocumented, there's a lot of conversations about authority, right? Don't look at cops in the eyes, those little things. But growing up, we were a family. We were focused. We were most of the time we were working for my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, from a very young age, we started helping my dad in the construction zones, and so me and my older brother were digging trenches for pipes. We were removing concrete. We were just helping my dad, and he was the leader of the family. He was the one that was building our life in the United States. And I knew we were from Mexico, but I didn't know until a little bit closer to high school that there was a difference in my situation. And back then, it wasn't very much talked about. It was about 2006, 2007, 2008 where Dreamers Coming Out of the Shadows really started, right? And that's why it was called Coming Out of the Shadows. And I was observing this, but I wasn't involved. And I wasn't really sure what was going on. And I remember when SB 1070 had passed, there was marches, there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of movement, but to me it was very confusing because I wasn't sure what really was going on. And as far as getting involved, my parents were really stay away from the action or whatever it was. But growing up in Arizona, it was fantastic. I loved my life. I loved my family, and we were always working. We were always working.
Did you grow up in Phoenix?
I did grow up in Phoenix. Yeah, we actually only moved about 3 blocks from where we originally were in an apartment. So, I went to Papago Elementary. My older brother went to Papago Elementary. My 2 younger brothers went to Papago Elementary. So, we grew up here. Preschool, kindergarten, all the way through high school. So yeah, I grew up in Arizona. Arizona's home to me.
Speaking of high school, I read that after high school you had planned to join the Marines. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I remember, to me, the Marine Corps was something that started in my heart from a really early age. And I remember in 3rd grade when the Twin Towers went down, I'll never forget that day because it was the first day that I saw my mom scared, I saw my teachers scared, and I saw the school and all these leaders in our life were fearful. And even though it happened in New York, the feeling was very deep within the community, and I remember that impacting me in 3rd grade. I was in 3rd grade, and this was unfolding. And growing up, I saw, the country take military action. And I remember seeing a lot of young men that went to Iraq and Afghanistan. And so for me, growing up, especially in high school, I was heavily into fitness. I was always lifting weights. And for me, the Marine Corps was this ideal of what they stand for: courage, honor, and commitment. And I wanted to be that. And I remember there was a Marine recruiter at my high school, and a couple of my friends had joined, and I was scared. I was very scared because you're about to join the Marine Corps, and I remember friends out, trying to figure out their options. Marines, Army, Navy. For me, it was like Marines. And I remember when I finally took the step to join, I was denied, and that's when I finally had a real conversation with my parents, and I found out that I did not have any sort of status in the country. And that was a really confusing point in my life, because I'm about to finish high school. I'm not the smartest kid on the block. I didn't have scholarships. And for me, I felt like that's where I wanted to be. That's who I wanted to become. And I wasn't able to do that. And so after high school, it was just a really confusing time, because, I didn't have the right to join. I didn't have the right to work. I didn't have the right to drive. And I had to pay cash for college. And my mom was a big proponent of college. She was all about education. So I joined a community college, and I would walk, walk the 3 miles to get there, walk there and walk back. And it was just a really confusing time, because my identity was just, I was confused.
And that kind of seems like the narrative for a lot of DACA recipients, right?
Yeah.
Because they grew up here, they don't realize they're anything different until high school's over, and it's there that it really hits, right?
No, absolutely.
No driver's license, no help with college. You can't join any of the armed forces. You can't get a job.
Right.
Yeah.
Question, so if you can guide us a little bit through that process. So you're ending high school, everything's happening, you're realizing all these, new obstacles that are coming in your way. You're unable to join the Marines, which is what you really wanted. What happens? What happens after?
To tell you the truth, I had a real moment where I felt depressed. I had this, I had all these things that I wanted to do, and I just felt really useless.
Yeah.
And I was at that when I started college. I was 19. I'm 19. I'm healthy, and I was really, I looked up to all these people. I had all these heroes, and I just felt so stuck, because there was no option. And there was people like, you go to a lawyer, blah blah blah, but there was no real option, and I was fed that, and I refused to believe that I was an outsider, because I believed and I believe in this country, and I loved this country. I mean, we pledged to the United States flag every single morning since kindergarten, and to me it was a really confusing time in my life to feel that the only option that I had was to work construction and to do 2 classes in college at a community college, I had this really terrible time figuring out who I was going to become, because my life looked like what I did in my entire childhood was what was going to be what I was going to do for the rest of my life, and I did not want that. And so I kept going. I kept going to school, and that ended 2.5 years into college, because Arizona politicians took action and made it even more. It made it more impossible for out-of-state. We qualified as out-of-state. I never believed that, because I grew up here. I grew up here. I was brought here as an infant. I grew up in Phoenix. I know every single inch of Phoenix, and I just refused to believe that I was an out-of-state, classification, and it was this title, and but it got in the way. It got in the way of school. I had to pay cash, and eventually, in 2011, community board members of the community college system decided to vote to enforce a proposition called Proposition 300, which meant that if you're an out-of-state student, you have to pay out-of-state costs to attend college. And at the time, I was taking 6 credits and no less. So a 2-year degree, associate's degree, was going to take me 3.5 to complete. But that was a journey I was willing to take, because it was my mother's drive that reason I was there and school. But in 2011, they decided to make it 0. So if you were an out-of-state student, your classes were now going to be increased by 600%. So my $300 class now became a $900 class overnight. And it was scary. It was scary to, just feel that it was over, that the only thing that I had going on at the time was now over. When I first, realized what was going on, I realized we were being very reactive. We were now protesting. We were now going to this meeting when these electeds had already made up their minds. And there was a lot of students there that was saying, hey, I'm undocumented and I don't support this. And the way I saw it is like these electeds are looking at it like, hey, I'm undocumented, you're about to hurt me, this is what they want. And I was just mind blown that a very small percent of the district was electing people that were nowhere near the actual representation of the district, which was heavily Latino. And we had this Tea Party Republican elected for the most Latino district in Phoenix, and to me that was a real moment where I absorbed that information, and I was asked to volunteer on a political campaign.
And that's how you got involved?
That's how I got involved. I got involved because and one of my biggest female heroes is Viridiana Hernandez. And she's the one that asked me to come along, and this was 5 years ago, and we've done so much work in between that time. But for me, I saw a group of students that were fighting to get Latinos to vote. People who were citizens that they're just not active in our community, and we were allowing people to vote in very small numbers, and they were making huge impacts that were just terrible. We saw a lot of students lose the opportunity to go to school.
Right.
And that was just a real tragedy that I was part of, and that was a real game changer for me at the time.
In that team of volunteers, that's Team Awesome?
Yeah,
that's the legendary Team Awesome that I've heard so much about.
That's right. And it's so funny because I remember doing this. I remember going. It was the offices on 67th Avenue in Thomas, next to a Food City. And it was all sorts of kids. It was undocumented kids, white kids, black kids, Chinese kids, and LGBTQ. And it was just this community of students that were just showing up to get involved. And there we were with our printed, walk packets and no water bottles, pins that didn't even work. We didn't have any cars, and we were walking neighborhoods, and we were all out there. And that also made a big impact in my life, because I realized that we were making a difference, because we were talking to people that had been registered to vote for 10 years and hadn't voted. And it just came down to not knowing what was going on. And I just remember the good and bad stuff. When I call it the little viejitas, they're like, ven pa acá, mijo, a ver, explícame esto, and I found that really amazing, because we were now helping our own community exercise their vote. And we were asking them to vote for this Latino, Daniel Valenzuela, at the time. And after a full year, and we call it blood, sweat, and tears, because there was blood, sweat, and tears.
There always is in organizing.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of tears, there was a lot of sweat, and there was definitely some blood in there. The dog bites. We had a lot of fun, but we were very driven by each other, because and for me it was the only opportunity that I felt at the time that I felt like I belonged. And I was volunteering endlessly, and my dad was very angry at the time, because he's like, you got to come and help me. And it hurt me, because I had to choose between helping my father, lift all this heavy equipment in the summer, or go walk for somebody I barely even knew. But for me, it was really about Vidi and a lot of these other students that were there fighting to matter, to have their voices heard. And I remember us talking about, how are we going to pass federal legislations like the DREAM Act that would allow undocumented students to join the military or get an education to earn citizenship, when we don't even have local power. And that district was 67% Latino, and it had been represented oppositely, because a very small chunk of the northern district was very high in outputting votes. And we looked at our, our precincts of where our Latinos were, and 35 votes, 67 votes, and you're looking at the northern 3,500 votes.
Wow.
And so we were
Huge
being
difference.
outweighed, and the resources by the city of Phoenix were up there. The parks were clean, the streets were nice, they were paved, police department was there, I had a relationship with, and we by the end of that year, Daniel Valenzuela became the first Latino to represent that district, and we were really, we were excited.
So Antonio, quick question.
Yeah.
So was it out of this? First of all, wasn't there a historic victory in this campaign you were a part of with regards to Latino turnout?
That's right, yeah.
And also, was it then after this that La Machine sort of pops up, and how does that happen?
La Machine came a couple years down the line, but going back to 2011, the biggest victory is that Latino turnout increased by 500%.
Wow.
And that sounds like a ton, but it isn't, because there were so many people that could vote, and we were relentlessly knocking. Sometimes we had 10 people out there, 14, 30. Sometimes it was just us, it was us by ourselves.
Yeah.
Knocking, but we weren't giving up, because it was the only opportunity that we felt at the time that was going to allow us to have power and voice and matter, because we were being attacked. The following year, Team Awesome was now a big part of the Democratic Party, and we were running elections. We were fighting to get Arpaio out of office in 2012. We had a couple of small wins, but we ultimately lost. But in that loss, we saw victory, because we saw that in 2012, Arpaio spent all his money. We gave him, Paul Benzone was a strong candidate, and I remember election night, there were so many people in tears. And to us folks, students that were there every single day, we were like, damn, we're close, And I remember it was just a real moment, because at the same time is when DACA came along by President Obama, and we were so busy, doing our we were canvassing, we were organizing, we were recruiting, and DACA just showed up, and none of us took advantage of it. And I remember on election night in November, we had a lawyer by the name of Ezequiel Hernandez, which is, he came up to us, like, hey man, have you guys applied? And we're like, no. And he's like, hey man, how can you help other people when you can't even help yourself?
Yeah. What are you waiting for?
And he took action, and he took us into his office, and he helped us file all of our documents for free. And that just for me was a really big moment of community support. By 2013, I had my DACA, and I was asked to run a campaign with Kate Gallego. And Kate Gallego, at the time, was a friend of mine, because I had met Ruben Gallego in 2011. And I remember Ruben Gallego making a huge impact in my life, because he was the first Latino elected that was actually walking with us in the sun. And we had a lot of people come and do stump speeches, like inspirational stuff. Yeah.
Speaking of the sun,
Yeah.
I canvassed in Phoenix twice. And the second time, I literally almost passed out.
It's hot.
It is so hot.
Yeah.
It is so hot. How? How do you guys do that, man? 117 degrees it was. I was canvassing outside, and I almost passed out.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
It was horrible. In 2 sentences, how do you get past the heat?
We had a reason. We had a real big reason. And again, sometimes we were 10 to 2 people out there. But we had a reason, we had all these things taken away from us, and we were fighting for our lives. I always felt we were fighting for our lives, because we were young people that now were being really attacked.
Right.
It was nasty. Now education was at the table, and the racism sometimes was present, right? Where you don't even have to look Mexican to be hated. Just the fact that you are something else is is a cause for hatred, and that's a sickness. You know, when people hate you without knowing you because you're from some other place is unbelievable. And I'll never understand that, but it exists, and it always has existed. The only option that we have is to fight, because our lives are our lives, and we all matter. And we can't allow people to degrade us because they feel like it. And so for me at least, it's always been a fight to fight for our honor as people, because we can't allow these other folks to degrade us because they feel whatever way. You know, you're either a friend or a foe. You know,
So out of that, La Machine showed up, and just because we might be a little short on time, La Machine showed up, and so tell us about La Machine. You guys have gone national. There's tons of stories on you and La Machine and the work that you guys do. So, tell us what you guys are fighting for.
And what are y'all working on currently right now?
Yeah.
Gotcha. We so La Machine was actually I started La Machine after Ruben Gallega's congressional race because I felt that there was a strong need for much more direct campaigning than there was currently. And so we did a very different model during Gallega's campaign, and it was very driven on who we had on the ground. And we were successful. We were able to elect one of the youngest member of Congress, which is also, he was in the Marines, and Ruben was just been a big part of my life. As far as what we do and what we're working on is we focus strictly on electoral politics and the buildup of districts that are low propensity, that we go through these districts in whichever capacity, voter registration or signatures or an actual campaign, to build up the capacity of the district by getting more people involved.
The low propensity voters, which is the exact opposite that the Democratic Party does. They put all of their eggs into the basket of those that always vote, which is why there's never any change.
Exactly. And so we go after those type of voters because it's an education problem. You know, a voter might not be voting because it's a very complicated ballot. And so when you get somebody that knocks on your door, that has a conversation in English or Spanish and explains what's going on, who's running, what they stand for, what the differences are, people vote. And so that's our biggest focus, is how we can impact our community by talking to our people. It's hard work, and a lot of resources are consumed by it, but it's what makes the difference between winning and losing elections. And one of the biggest things that we're focused on is helping more younger people get into office. And then particularly more women into office, more Latinas into office, and just getting more people who need more help in getting there. You know, there's a lot of folks that run for office that are lawyers, that are independently wealthy, that are connected, but you have teachers, you have lawyers, you have activists that run for office, and it's a very confusing environment, and it's all math and time. And so what we do is we choose very carefully who we get behind, and we've had a lot of victories, but we've also had losses, and the losses have only allowed us to understand how to further this vision, which is how to get win campaigns. And what we're currently working on here in Tucson is the Strong Start campaign, and that is a campaign that will help 6,000 to 9,000 more 3 to 4 year olds get into a Head Start program. And currently there's 14,000 3 to 4 year olds that don't get into the program. And so that's one of the initiatives that we're working on down here that we really believe in, because it's a citizens initiative. This is teachers and funders getting together saying that there's a problem and we're going to put it on the ballot. And so what we're doing is we're currently going out there and collecting signatures and and recruiting students and people to go out there and talk to the voters about this. And it'll eventually become a campaign, and that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how do we get more people involved in the electoral process so that we have a higher chance of victory? Because just like you said, you know, it's easy to go after the voters that do vote. You know, you mail them TV, whatever. But the people who are left out are the majority of of who lives in whichever district. And so those are the people that we really focus on understanding what's happening so they can participate and count.
Speaking of counting, so we've kind of went through most of this, but you did an interview with NBC, and in the interview, I'm going to quote you. You said, the question was, why should Latinos vote? You said, Latinos should vote. Why Latinos should vote is simply participating and being accounted for. And when you're not accounted for, people get to say things about you. When you're not accounted for, people get to make decisions about you. People make decisions against you. And when you're accounted for, I believe that you're respected. Can you expand on that for us? And if representation within this system, which, as we've spoken before, has historically been used to oppress, especially Latinos and people of color, and this is your goal is representation within this system? How do you reconcile the two? Where we just spoke down a big line of SB 1070 of propositions that are directly aimed to disenfranchise and repress people of color, especially immigrants.
Right.
How do you reconcile those two?
The biggest thing that I've learned is that when policy is introduced, when votes are about to be voted on, politicians only think about one thing, which is re-election.
Right.
And so when you have a decision to make, whether it's right or wrong, the politician will decide what's in their best interest because of who's in their district and what they're saying. And so when 35% of whichever district is voting, 35% is who's accounted for and who is being listened to. And so when people don't vote, when Latinos don't vote, and I've seen this a lot, people are like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Oh, absolutely matters because SB 1070, right? We're looking at the presidency right now and all of the damage that's being done. I met a lot of people like, I'm not gonna vote because I don't like anybody, Hillary, blah, blah, and Donald Trump, and there we are. People made a decision. Now we have a president that is truthfully hurting the country. And I think that everybody, Republicans and Democrats, are seeing that. And Republicans are standing up and saying, oh my God, we regret our vote. But the name of the, how we reconcile the both is accountability. And it's not about a party because the party is an identity, a Republican or a Democrat, and both of them have what they stand, their platforms. But when it comes to the votes and what they vote on, if people in whichever district are not actively harassing or conversating with their congressman or state legislator, then those legislators will look at the people who are professionally paid to talk to them all day, which are lobbyists. And so it's a tough thing for us to get more people informed, but that's why there's a lot of community groups that are doing and outpouring a lot more information about what's happening at the Capitol, what's happening nationally, so that voters on the ground can understand what's going on and could simply call nowadays. So there's now technology, there's apps that you can send a text message to your congressman, to your state representative. And so there's all these new avenues of communication that are really allowing groups and community members and voters to influence their electeds, which is their jobs, right? Their jobs are to work for the people. And that's a bridge that we're working to gap. But ultimately, what I said on that interview is that when you're not voting, you're literally forfeiting your voice. And when people don't vote, they literally don't matter when it comes to what the politician is going to do.
If I can just
Yeah.
piggyback a little bit out of Zaira's questions, what would you tell those people that understand the importance of electoral democracy and participating in the electoral system? And like you just said yourself before, La Machine, before they get behind a candidate, right, they have to stand behind, share values, and it's not everybody that they
Correct.
Put their services and support for. But the people that would criticize the electoral system and say the Republican and Democratic Party are fundamentally, there's no difference between them and their policies ultimately. Would there be a possibility La Machine would support a third independent party candidate in a future? Given right the conditions politically in these countries are changing very quickly, and let's say there is a rise of like a new independent People's Party, would La Machine put their efforts forward into like supporting something like that? Because at the end of the day, maybe just electing only young and women or people of color, that is in essence maybe not enough to think they'll have progressive politics or will follow up. So how does that?
I think one thing that's very apparent is that time is the biggest thing, right?
Yeah.
You're right. Politics is changing, and a lot of things are changing. Mostly because we, at a touch of our button on our phones, can see what's going on and react towards. More people, people are using this word now, woke, right? Which I find kind of interesting because.
What's wrong with woke?
If it takes Donald Trump to scare you, then it's we tried to tell you, and
It was coming.
We tried.
And I think with an independent party, I think the last real person that gave a lot of young people hope was Bernie Sanders.
Definitely.
And I got the privilege to meet him for a quick second. And
I met him twice.
one of the biggest things that blew me away about him as a person, not a politician, was that when he didn't know the answer to a question, he brought somebody on stage and said, "I don't know," and so we needed to figure this out together. And I thought that was one of the most truthful moments that I experienced listening to a leader at the time, because everybody has something back to say, they'll pivot or whatever, but I thought that it was very important because we have so many problems as humans, and politics is us trying to figure it out. And whether it's healthcare, immigration, global warming, environment issues, whatever it is, I think people are jaded by the idea that they have to be loyal to one party. And that's a problem because you look at Republicans and they're die-hard. They'll vote for anybody with an R. I've met people, is he a Republican or a Democrat? I'm like, he's a Democrat. Oh, I'm not voting for him. You don't even know this is a city council race. It has nothing to do with the party, but people are stuck in that mentality and it works. And I think that the new generation of voters, which are the 18-year-olds that are becoming voters now, they're looking at politics in a very different light. And so I think that, this is just my opinion, that in the next 10 years, younger voters that now are going to have to be part of the process are going to be voting on the right things versus the party. And the party doesn't like that. Democratic Party, we should register more people Democrat. But we've done a lot of voter registration. We go to colleges. Most students register an independent because they don't want to be aligned with the party.
Absolutely.
The problem with that is that they won't get targeted. And when they don't get targeted, they're confused, they don't know what's going on, they don't vote. And so it's a big problem between how the rules are set up in any state and how voting happens. So one of the biggest things that we're hoping to happen here in the state of Arizona is automatic voter registration. Because when you're automatically registered and it comes election day and we're pulling you out of wherever you're at, bus stop, wherever, come vote, and cast your voice.
Absolutely.
That's democracy. That's people getting involved. But there's so many loopholes. There's so many problems with people voting. We've taken people to, and I remember in 2012, I took a Cuban family to a polling location. And one of them was in a wheelchair, and so we had to stuff the wheelchair in my Ford Explorer back in the time and got them there, and they had to vote provisionally, which means that most likely that vote might not be counted. And that's scary to me because it's like, wow, like this is a registered voter, but the county and all of the issues that they had just didn't have them on the rosters. And it's all this problem that we have between who gets to vote like that and who has to jump through hoops to prove that they can vote.
Right.
So, to answer your question, yes, we would, yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I wanted to embarrass you with a picture of your hair
Oh, yeah?
at the end, but they actually put it up at the beginning
Oh,
of the
okay,
show.
sure,
But there
yes.
you are.
Oh, I mean, yeah.
Is that ever gonna come back?
Yes, you know what? I'm
Because
throwing that
it's
out
so
right now.
great.
Yeah, I'm throwing it out.
Right on.
Also, and I remember being in the exact same chair that you are right now, and somebody said, "Will you ever run for office?"
Me?
Yes.
I've been asked that, but in my heart, it's no. Because I believe in getting behind people. And I've met a lot of fantastic people that should be electeds. I feel like my work is that. And I met a kid in Chicago named Ricky Cerna. He's now living here in Arizona. I like to say he's the next Barack Obama, right? And
Wow.
this kid has a lot of dreams, a lot of attitude, a lot of passion, and doesn't come from a very strong economic place. So we brought him out here, and now he's looking to run. He's looking to run in 5 years. And so to me, it's about getting behind those people, the people that do want to be the policy changers, the people who do want to run for
So not
office.
you then?
Yeah.
No?
Not me,
I'm gonna
no.
quote you on that.
Okay.
Okay, did you have any other questions?
No, just be on the lookout for La Machine, everything they do here in Arizona. Support them, and look for Strong Toward Tucson here in Tucson to vote for.
Yes, it's a great initiative. It's for poor families, and it's always last. That we always think about the poor people last. So please get familiar with it and maybe volunteer with them.
Yeah,
Thank you so
absolutely.
much for
Thank you so much
being
for
here,
coming. Thank you,
Antonio.
man. Appreciate it.
You're awesome.